Hi everyone. So the Dreamsnatcher, chapter 33. So not chapter 23. Cinderella Bull's foretelling. Moll's eyes darted round the chamber. They were at the end of it. There was nowhere left to run. Griff snarled through clenched teeth, and Oak whipped out his dagger, pushing Moll, Alfie, and Siddy behind him. The footsteps charged on through the darkness towards them. Moll's pulse hammered in her ears, and her skin crawled with sweat. It was over. There was no way out. She reached for Griff and felt his heart beating with hers. "Oak!" came a cry from the shadows. Terror gripped Moll's throat. The dream snatch had started inside her again, slow, steady. She watched in horror as three dark shapes loomed out of the shadows. Skull, Hemlock, Gobbler. "Oak!" the voice cried again. Siddy had closed his eyes, prepared to be eaten alive by whatever was coming for him. And, beside him, Alfie felt for his dagger. Oak strained his neck towards the advancing shapes, his dagger outstretched before him, and then he lowered it with a smile. One after the other, Domino, Wisdom, and Noah shot out of the shadows into the light. "Sorry for cause of fright," Domino panted, hands on his knees. Though he was the smallest of the brothers, he'd outrun them both. "Mushy sent us in after you as soon as she saw it." He wiped the sweat from his brow. "You're not safe down here." Oak took a step forward. "Saw what? What's happened?" "Skull, he's coming," Wisdom said. "Hemlock, Gobbler, Brunt, all of them. Cinderella Bull read it in her crystal ball. Skull knows we lied about Moll, searching for the amulets far from the camp. He must have used some kind of dark magic now he knows her name to find out where she is." Domino nodded. "They've come back to the camp, back to the clearing, Cinderella Bull says." "With the hounds?" Oak asked. Noah shook his head. "Cinderella Bull saw them in her crystal ball too. The lul's healing properties worked because when the hounds woke up they were just harmless strays. Skull let them loose when he realised what we've wheeled the wagons out of the clearing and hidden them in the forest. Because Skull means to burn Moll and Griff out of Tanglefern." Gruff dug his claws into the ground, his fur bristling with anger. Beside him, Moll clenched a fist around the amulet. "Well, Skull and Hemlock aren't going to smoke us out because we found the amulet." And Moll uncurled her fist to show the glowing amulet. But her words crumbled into silence. And what? What did she think she'd be able to do with a necklace against the power of a shadow mask? But Wisdom, Domino, and Noah were staring at the amulet now, transfixed. Wisdom straightened himself up, running a hand over his ponytail, and then he noticed the carved shapes of the silver stags all around them. He looked at Moll. "You're right. Skull isn't going to smoke you out, Moll, because these stags and that amulet are worth 10 times the power of the shadow masks." His eyes shone. "We've got a chance now, Pa, haven't we?" Oak nodded. "Are all the camps safely away from the clearing?" "They're up in the sacred oaks already," Noah said. "Most are armed with daggers, and Jessie's got a pistol. When Skull comes, they'll let him have it." Oak took a deep breath. "Then we've got to go fast, because I won't let my camp fight Skull alone." Siddy glanced at Moll's and Alfie's daggers, then he tapped Oak's back. "I haven't got anything to fight Skull with." "You could borrow my catapult," Moll replied, handing it to him along with a sharpened stone she'd kept tucked in her pocket since the night she'd been rescued from the heath. "If the rocks are sharp and the aim's keen, it's as good as a dagger." They turned from the wall of the stags, and Moll threw a last glance at the carved wildcat, hoping that somehow, somewhere, her pa would feel it. Using the light from the amulet to guide them, they sped through the chamber, raced up the staircase, and hauled themselves out of the well. The domed door was open, just a fraction, and beyond it there was a darkness, a silence. Wisdom looked at his father. "We need to climb this oak. From there we've got a better position to fight." Oak nodded to his sons. "Use your daggers wisely." On Skull's 3 lads, to wound, not kill. Siddy felt for Porridge II and muttered a last goodbye. Fear snaked round Moll's throat. Inside the heart of the forest she was safe, but out there were Skull and Hemlock, and the Soul Splinter. She thought back to her pa's words, "You're not going anywhere in life without bravery." And with that she tiptoed towards the door and crept outside. While they had been inside, night had fallen in the deserted clearing, and the sky was full of stars. Griff slunk in front of Moll and leapt up into the sacred oak. Moll felt for the ridges, scoops, and bulges in the bark and twisted up after him. The others followed, spreading out across the branches. Moll clung to the trunk, her body trembling. In the distance there were lights, and they were crossing the boundary, snaking through the river in the line of fire. Oak clutched his dagger, then turned to his sons. "Skull, Hemlock, and Gobbler are souls rotted in hell. Do as you like with them. No one's going to mind them gone from Tanglefern." He clasped each of his son by the hand. "Now split up among the branches and take aim." Moll shuffled out along a branch, but Oak grabbed her arm and yanked her behind him. They can't be allowed to see you, Moll. You're to stay back. Understand? Moll. But it's all because of me this is happening, she whispered. She felt for her past dagger. I want to help fight back. If we lose you, we lose everything. Moll, the forest, and the bone murmur. That's what this is about. And so, flanked by Griff and Alfie and shielded by Oak, Moll could only watch as Skull's gang drew nearer and nearer. Oak cupped his hands to his mouth and let out an owl call, and from every sacred oak around the clearing, owl calls answered back. The camp knew Oak had come back for them, and now was the time to fight. Chapter 34, Up in the Sacred Oaks. Skull's gang rode into the clearing, holding torches that blazed with fire. The scars marking Brunt's face glowed in the torchlight, and Gobbler's running eye gleamed like a beetle. But what frightened Moll most, what made her blood course through her veins, was not the two masks lit up beneath the hoods. It was the strange creature that prowled between the shadow masks. Moving like oil, stalking into the clearing with blazing red eyes and a scaled body, no bigger than a hound, but the head that hung from its black body was the unmistakable face of an ape. Oak gasped. It can't be. Moll's face twisted with terror. What was it? Cinderella Bull was wrong, Oak said. Not all of Skull's hounds woke up as a harmless stray. This one woke up as an altar skin. Witch doctors are known for cursing the spirits of animals in their power, and when they curse the spirits, they shift their appearance too. He paused. The altar skin will have a mind of pure evil now. It'll do anything Skull commands. Moll clutched Griff tight. Gobbler hurled a torch towards the base of an oak, and its light illuminated his broken smile. Come out of the trees and fight! Within seconds, a path of fire had ripped through the undergrowth, and Skull's gang cheered. Oak's gypsies leapt higher within the trees. Hand over, Moll, and I got Wildcat, or we'll see the clearing burn to the ground, Gobbler shrieked. Skull's boys spread out with Gobbler to face the oaks where the wagons used to stand. But Skull and Hemlock hung back in the centre of the clearing with the altar skin. They didn't need to fight. Their curses were stronger than daggers and torches. The shadow masks' heads were bowed, and their Dreamsnatch flooded Moll's body, tearing through her with thuds of loathing. We know you're up there, Moll, Pecksniff. You and your Wildcat. There's no escaping us now. Give yourself up, and all this will stop. All of your camp will be spared. Blood pounded in Moll's ears. Your parents tried to fight us, but what good did it do them? If you don't surrender, we'll kill Oak, we'll torture the women, we'll tear the children apart. Moll gripped the amulet, willing herself to be strong, but it no longer glowed, and hanging around her neck it looked nothing more than a small lump of metal. Doubt crept in as the Dreamsnatch beat louder and louder. Perhaps the amulet had never been magical at all. Beside her, Griff was clasping the branch with his paws. The Wildcat burrowed into her chest, his body shuddering. Gobbler and Brunt had lowered another torch to the foot of an oak. Gobbler's hunched back swelled into light as the flames crawled upwards, crisping the leaves to rust. More gypsies jumped within the branches. Give Moll and the Wildcat up, and your forest will be spared, Gobbler shouted. What hope have you got against a shadow mask? Who's going to answer me that? And then Jessie emerged, darting out of the branch on a burning tree. Siddy gasped. Pa! I'll answer you that, Gobbler, Jessie hurled down a dagger. It shot through the flames and sliced keen into Gobbler's neck. Gobbler yelled out in pain, his back humping over his face as he slid from his cob to the ground. He crawled a few steps towards the edge of the clearing, his running eye wild and wet, and then, after a few moments, he was still. Skull looked up from his chant. Charge it to the ground! Like unseen acrobats, the gypsies leapt within the oaks from branch to branch, from tree to tree. Daggers showered down towards Skull's boys, but they sidestepped on their cobs, hurling their torches at the trees. The clearing blazed orange, a graveyard of scorched undergrowth. Brunt urged his cob forward towards Jessie's tree, realising his ma and baby sister would be tucked up within his paw. Siddy fumbled for his catapult and drew it out. Roaring with fury, he pulled back on the pouch. The sharpened stone flew through the air and slammed into Brunt's head. He cried out and tumbled backwards off his cob. Two more knives hurtled through the air, one slammed into the leg of a tall, lanky boy with ruthless eyes, and the other lodged in the arm of the last of Skull's boys. He had a haunted look, purple, curled lips, and dark shadows for eyes. The boys fell down off their cobs and stumbled between the roaring flames. Still more daggers showered down towards Skull and Hemlock this time, but they dodged them with their sinister quickness, hanging back to perform curses. And between them, the altar skin's red eyes narrowed. Wisdom flung down another dagger, then looked to Oak, who nodded. Stay here, Moll. Oak whispered. So long as Griff and Alfie are with you, you are safe. And then he shouted out into the clearing, Down from the trees, men! Oak's sons, together with Oak, Jessie, and Florence's father, leapt from the burning branches, spilling into the clearing like a raging tide. Moll watched, aghast, as they darted between the flames, brandishing their daggers at Skull's boys. You're outnumbered, and you know it! Oak cried. We'll spare you all so long as you leave the forest and never return. Brunt was fumbling for something inside his waistcoat. Then a pistol gleamed in the flames. Let him have it, boys! Several gunshots cracked into the air. Wisdom! Jessie! Use your guns to wound, not kill! Oak roared. Moll watched in horror, and yet, as she watched, the figures, the flames, and the cobs were all becoming a blur. She felt the heat from the fire burn inside her, growing with Skull and Hemlock's chant. Her grip on the branch loosened, her balance wobbled, but Alfie seized hold of her. Beside them, Griff's fur was wet with sweat, and his eyes were wild. But Moll was oblivious to Griff now, and all she could feel, all she could hear, was the Dreamsnatch clamouring in her ears. Leave Tanglefern, and we'll spare you, Oak bellowed. Skull's boys fought on, blind to Oak's words. Oak jammed his leg into Brunt's hand. The pistol dropped from Brunt's grasp, but he lashed out blindly with his dagger. Oak leapt backwards, then raised his own dagger. Jessie scampered forward and grabbed that fallen pistol from the ground. He raised it up, taking aim at another boy, but the boy ducked behind a tree. Brunt, jagging his dagger at Oak's face, Oak jerked aside, but the blade snicked his cheek, blood trickling down to his jaw, yet still Oak jumped forward. Brunt was quick, and he leapt aside, but Oak quicker. He brought his dagger down onto Brunt's arm, and it sliced through his clothing. Brunt howled in pain. Oak drew out his pistol. Leave! He roared, or we'll shoot you all dead. Brunt's eyes were wide with fear, and he faltered backwards. His jaw was shaking, but he raised his dagger again. Oak fired 2 shots into the ground, before Brunt's feet. They ricocheted off a fallen branch and spattered against Brunt's shin. Brunt's legs buckled beneath him, and he cried out. He looked at the dagger in his hand. Blood had dripped down from the wound in his arm and was now smeared over the handle. Grimacing, he let the dagger fall to the ground, and clutching his arm to his chest, he limped away, out of the clearing, into the darkness. Come back! Skull roared. But Brunt had already disappeared into the forest. He won't come back for you, Oak cried to the last of Skull's boys. Leave, and he won't fight you any more. Find other lodges and work. Skull's dealing in a magic far darker than you realise. Skull's boys tumbled backwards, clutching their wounds, bent double and fighting for breath. They looked at each other with panic-stricken faces. Oak's men gathered together in a cloud of anger, shouting and wielding their weapons, beaten and bloodied. Skull's boys heaved themselves away from the clearing. Skull and Hemlock kicked their cobs in pursuit of the boys, howling for them to return. The soul spint has been summoned! Skull shouted after them. You want to miss out on dark magic like that? The altar skin flicked a glance up to the very branch Moll crouched on, then followed. Moll blinked several times, trying to understand what she was seeing. They were winning, surely, but then why did everything in her body tell her that Skull and Hemlock were stronger than all of this? The shadow masks were lost in the trees for a moment, and in all the commotion, no one noticed Gobbler's misshapen body haul itself up with a gun and take aim at the back of Oak's head. No one, except Alfie. The barrels of Gobbler's gun loomed like tunnelled eyes, but Alfie's arm shot back, and with one eye closed, he hurled his dagger. It spun through the air, a glint of leather and metal, and sunk into Gobbler's hand. The gun fell to the ground, and Gobbler edged backwards, cursing. Alfie's eyes widened in shock as he realised what he'd done. As Oak's camp fought to quell the flames, Skull tore back in the clearing, pausing for a second by Gobbler. Help me, Gobbler rasped, and Skull fired his pistol into Gobbler's heart. He raised a cloaked arm and pointed at the branch Moll and Griff crouched on. That one, he hissed. Then he turned from the clearing and rode back towards the deep wood. Moll shook her head, burrowing into her knees. They're calling for me, Alfie. Help. Make it stop. Beside her, Griff clung to the branch, his whiskers trembling, his growl weakened to a whimper. Then he threw his head back and yelped. Alfie helped Moll by the shoulders. They've gone, Moll. It's just us. Moll shook her head, her body rigid with fear. They're here, Alfie. No, they're here. She shuffled nearer to him, and like ghosts in the darkness, Hemlock and the altar skin waited, stitched into shadows beneath the sacred oak. We know you're here, Moll, with your wildcat. We feel you. We can hear you breathing. Give yourselves up. Can hear it. Moll whispered, her eyes wide. But before Alfie could answer, something black and sinuous bolted up the tree towards Moll. Griff leapt up in front of her, his claws splayed. The altar skin's red eyes throbbed and its scaled limbs thrashed out at Griff. Moll scuttled backwards, pressing herself against the tree trunk. With Alfie, Griff yelped in pain as the altar skin's claws sank into its fur, and then he twisted free, gnashing his teeth, lashing at the ape-like face with razored talons. The altar skin bellowed in anger and hurled itself at the wildcat. Time shrieked to a halt. Moll caught Griff's terrified eyes just as he fell from the tree, limbs scrabbling. The altar skin hurtled to the ground after him. "Griff!" yelled Moll. Griff darted away from the altar skin, but a net shot out from the shadows, hissing through the air. It whipped against Griff's face, and he swerved left into the clutches of the altar skin. Moll struggled against Alfie, feeling Griff's pain tugging inside her. "Griff!" she yelled. Again, her eyes filling with tears. "If you go after him, the shadow masks get you both," Alfie shouted. Hemlock slid against the shadows, hurling the net again. It sucked Griff backwards, cutting into his fur. Snarling, spitting, tearing at the ropes with his teeth, Griff fought inside the net. The altar skin thumped a claw on Griff's back, and Hemlock pulled the net tighter, strapping the ropes to his cob. Oak and his men were rushing towards Hemlock now, but he leapt onto his cob and spurred it on, back towards the deep wood with the altar skin. Moll twisted and shrieked within Alfie's grasp. "No, not Griff," she howled, great sobs ripping through her body. Jessie fired the pistol at the altar skin. It stumbled, and then he fired again and again until it slumped down dead. But Hemlock rode on, wrenching Griff further and further away from the clearing. Chapter 35. Darkness Stirring. Moll scrambled down the tree, her eyes blinded by tears. The clearing was a blackened wasteland, the sacred oaks charred with ash. But Oak's gypsies came back and forth from the river, beating down the flames with pails of water. Oak rushed over to Moll. "Okay?" And she knew what that meant. They were going back for Griff. She watched as Siddy tended to his father's wounds, then she scoured the clearing for Alfie. But he was nowhere to be seen. Dread crept in. Perhaps he'd realised they didn't stand a chance now, and the thought of returning to Skull's camp had thrown up fresh fears. It was Raven that Moll spotted first, entering the clearing, ahead of Alfie as he led Jinx and Oak's cob towards them. "Figured there's not a chance we're letting the shadow masks take Griff, so I fetched cobs." Moll tried to smile, but an emptiness was growing inside her, filling the space where Griff had always been, even if she'd not known it until now. They'd swung themselves up onto the cobs. "Wisdom, get the last of the flames out, then see to the wounded with Siddy," Oak cried. "Moll help you." Driving the cobs through the trees, they galloped through the river and raced into the deep wood. The stars above them seemed to fade, one by one, as the darkness grew. Moll clasped the amulet round her neck tight as they galloped through the beeches, past the dead owl and the pierced rat. There were no signs of the vapours this time, but somehow the air felt heavier, not with rain, but with something much, much darker. Alpha's body was hunched with fear, and Oak had cocked his pistol, but Moll didn't notice. Griff's absence burned within her. She'd get him no matter what. They pulled the cobs back to a trot, then picked their way through the last of the trees before Skull's camp. A low, almost strangled laugh escaped through the branches towards them. "Tie him up on the ceremonial table, Hemlock!" Skull shrieked with pleasure. The three of them edged forward and peered into the clearing. Enormous torches lit up a long wooden table. A giant bat had been carved into it, painted black wings unfurling across the surface. Only then did they notice the trees ringing the clearing. Moll gripped Jinx's reins tight. They were unmistakably alive. The trees leered forward, their branches twisted into tendrilled arms, roots knotted into mangled feet. But the worst thing of all was the faces. Gruesome heads bulged out of gnarled bark, troll heads with bat wings for ears, goblin faces with wild boar snouts, werewolves with snake tongues, warlock heads with wolf fangs. And they were snarling, growling, licking their lips in gleeful expectation. Moll seized Oak's arms. "They're tree ghouls, aren't they?" Alfie froze. "Tree ghouls?" Even Oak's body was rigid with fear. "The vapours. Skull must have trapped them inside the trees, and when you trap the broken hearts of witches, their curses are said to seep into the vessel that carries them." He urged the cobs back several places, and then in a low whisper he said, "Stay well away from them." But Moll's words fell short. Skull and Hemlock were approaching the table, wrestling with a bundle of rope and fur. Moll watched, her body tearing inside as she remembered what Oak had said about Griff years ago. "Wildcats will fight to the death for their freedom. They are what it means to be really free." "Ah!" Griff was stamping his forelegs and hissing through his teeth. He flung himself against the ropes, and the tree ghouls cackled and groaned around him. The ache inside Moll grew, pounding inside her throat. But the tree ghouls moaned on, and into their cries Griff began to yelp. Hemlock tossed the bundle of wildcat and rope onto the table. Then, seizing a hammer, Skull drove several nails into the ropes, fixing Griff fast. Bound on his stomach, his limbs splayed, Griff gnashed his teeth and jerked his head from side to side. And then the chanting started, low and deep, as Skull and Hemlock circled the table, their masks in shadow, their hands held high. Moll clenched her teeth, ready to fight their dream snatch. But it never came. What followed was different, darker. Tonight we summon you to finish our chant. Master of the Soul Splinter, do what we can't. Come from the shadows, the gloom most dim. I use curses of power, deadly and grim. For here lies the beast, the one we all need. Join with us now and make this cat bleed. Believe us, the girl is not far away. She'll come for him soon, the last of our prey. Somewhere in the night sky, far above them, something was stirring. The darkness seemed to thicken, and the tree ghouls seemed to screech with pleasure. Alfie turned to Oak. We go, you and me, into the clearing to fight for Griff. And leave me here? Hissed Moll. I'm not sitting by while... It happened so quickly they could barely draw breath. A tree ghoul ripped from its roots from the soil and lurched towards them, swiping out with a withered claw. Moll screamed, ducking beneath it. It crunched down, rupturing the soil, and she fell from Jinx. Oak and Alfie spurred their cobs forward, towards the clearing. Use your dagger and Griff's ropes, Oak yelled to Alfie. But the tree ghoul lumbered forward, wrenching them from their cobs, stringing them up in the air like puppets. Run, Moll! Oak screamed. Get away from here! Moll scoured the trees for Jinx, but she was gone. She looked towards the ceremonial table, and then she met Griff's eyes. He blinked hard at her. There's still hope, Moll, he seemed to be saying. Hope, Moll thought. What hope is there in all of this? Griff tried to raise his head, but the ropes held him fast. And all the while, Skull and Hemlock muttered round the table. The summoning was almost complete. Come to us, Darkbite, the child is near. Drop from the darkness, feed on her fear. Moll cowered in the shadows of an ordinary beech. Just meters from her, a tree ghoul grunted as it overturned the undergrowth in search of her. Alfie and Oak wriggled and slashed at it with their daggers, but it wound them over and over again in its branches, like a spider biting a fly. And, above the clearing, the darkness was gathering, conjuring a high-pitched screeching of its own. Bats, thousands of them, swarmed overhead, swelling, growing, bulging into a terrifying shape. A figure was materializing, made entirely from bats, and it throbbed high above them. Darkbite, the third Shadow Mask and the master of the Soul Splinter, had been summoned. Tears streamed down Moll's cheeks. If she ran in to try and save Griff, the Shadow Masks would kill her, and the bone murmur would be broken forever. Everything her parents had fought for would be in vain. She caught Griff's eyes, and the tears fell faster. You're going to be okay, Moll, he was saying. She could almost feel his thoughts. Silent sobs racked Moll's body. Maybe this was how it was meant to be. Griff's life for her own. He'd saved her once before, and now he was doing it again. The figure of bats was throbbing with screeches, hollow like a dead man's call, and it was sinking towards the table. Moll clutched the 3 feathers inside her sheath. Luck, protection, and she looked up at Alk and Alfie. Friendship. She gripped her pa's dagger tight, then, throwing one last glance at the tree ghoul crashing through the undergrowth meters from her, she darted into the clearing. Another tree ghoul thrust down its claws, but Moll leapt between them, racing on towards Griff. Hemlock and Skull looked up at her, laughing behind their masks. Above them, the bat's figure slid nearer still. Griff looked at Moll, his yellow-green eyes large and scared. Ember, a voice inside Moll called. Almost so weakly, Moll wondered whether she'd heard it at all. Ember, it said again, and somehow Moll knew that this was her pa willing her on. Her mind whirled, and then she remembered the carving above the wildcat's head in the heart of the forest. She gripped the amulet for all she was worth, rubbing her thumb over the jewel. She felt a surge of hope. A hope so strong she could practically taste it. But the descending figure, still more than a bat, was settling on the ceremonial table. 2 enormous leathery wings unfurled over Griff. The amulet seemed to tingle inside Moll's finger, and it was glowing again, as it had done in the heart of the forest, coating the whole tree in a turquoise veil. Sorry. Skull's eyes locked on the amulet. "Stupid child." Hemlock glided towards her, his mask a wall of stone. Moll stumbled round the clearing, closer and closer to Griff, gripping the amulet and her pa's dagger tight. The turquoise light was brightening now, crushing the darkness back. Clinging to a shred of hope, Moll tore the necklace off and held the amulet high. "You can't take Griff away from me," she shouted, "because we've got things more powerful than the Shadow Masks ever dreamed of." She shook the amulet for the Shadow Masks to see. "We'll never give up the bone on the Mole Murmur. We'll save the old magic." Moll was trembling, but she could feel her pa's voice inside her, urging her on. Hemlock ran towards Moll and she rubbed the amulet harder and harder. She looked at Griff, the longing bursting up inside her. Hemlock advanced still closer. All at once there was a thunderous crash, followed by a tumult of screeching as the winged figure on the table crumbled into thousands of bats that tore off into the shattered sky. Hemlock stopped, his eyes suddenly wide with terror. The ceremonial table had split in two, and Griff was scrabbling out of the net, tearing back the ropes. He shot free and bounded over to Moll, flinging himself against her. Moll held him tight, and their hearts clamoured together, beating with love and pain. "The amulet!" Oak roared. Oak roared as the treacle that held him bashed him against the branch. "Hold it up against Moll!" Skull and Hemlock's heads were bent low. Moll raised the amulet high and staggered backwards, her dagger ready. Griff limped in a circle around her. He was cut and battered, but his teeth were bared. The two Shadow Masks edged forward while muttering their curses, and with every step they advanced, a terrible pain split through Moll. Griff growled and spat. He could feel it too. "You won't win," Moll stammered, rubbing the amulet harder. "Nothing good can come now you've cut away your souls." There was another deafening crash, followed by another, then another. All around them the treacles were spitting down their centres, smashing forward in crumpled heaps, like giant stacks of bones. Alfie and Oak, finally free, raced towards Moll. The Shadow Masks were centimetres away from Moll and Griff now, but their bodies couldn't fight what came next. The blue light from the amulet seemed to thicken into a mist, and it curled around Skull and Hemlock, tearing at their masks and ripping away to reveal faces. And they were the most terrible faces Moll had ever seen. The skin was a sickly grey, and it hung in shriveled folds, writhing with maggots. The mouths and noses were slits like gashes in rotting skin. Moll recoiled in horror. Then the turquoise mist began to claw at the Shadow Masks' necks. Their bodies contorted in vicious spasms, cringing backwards. Skull clutched at his face, almost tearing the skin from his scalp. "Get away from me!" he howled. "Get away!" "Dark Bite!" Hemlock cried. "Come back to us!" His body jolted into another spasm. Moll's eyes widened, but Dark Bite didn't come. The Shadow Mask's eyes were bulging white. Rolling within sunken skin, Moll's stomach churned. Beetles, large and black, were spilling from the Shadow Masks' mouths, and as the mist tore at them, their bodies began to shrivel. The mists grew brightening and thickening, until all that was left of the Shadow Masks were two masks, a skull and a face of slate. And then two rasping voices hissed through the clearing towards Moll. "Dark Bite will come back for you, the Master always does." A shooting pain pierced through Moll, sharper than anything she'd felt before. She stumbled to the ground, clutching Griff and the amulet to her. The voices muttered on, knifing at her skin. "You can take our bodies, but you never take our souls. We're locked inside the soul splinter. You'll never truly die." Summoning the last of her strength, Moll crawled forward and stabbed the mask with her pa's dagger. The voices crumbled into hisses like thousands of tormented snakes before dissolving into the dawn. Pain seared through Moll. The forest around her was fading, Oak's and Alfie's cries just voices in the distance. But the clearing, it was changing. The mist was glittering now, and it couldn't be, but it was melting into water, settling as a sparkling lake. Moll could feel herself slipping further away. The amulet was wriggling inside her palm again. She tried to hold it, but it struggled free. She seized the chain, trying to draw it back, but it tugged against her fingers, and as it did so, Moll heard her pa's voice somewhere deep, deep inside her, beyond the pain inflicted by the Shadow Mask. "My Moll, you did it! You won the first amulet and beaten back Skull and Hemlock." The amulet pulled harder, and the chain dug deep into Moll's fingers. "I love you, Moll, and I'll be with you always." The voice was silent for a second. "But there's a time for everything. So long as my soul is down here with you, it's trapped by the damage the soul splinter did. You must let me go." "Where? Where will you go?" Moll sobbed. The stars, Moll. Every star is a soul watching over us, and I'll be looking down at you, always. Moll felt for her pa's words and held them close. I love you, Pa, she whispered. I'll never really leave you, Moll. I know. Clinging to the echo of his whisper, Moll let the amulet slip through her fingers. She felt a strange lightness, as if a weight had suddenly been lifted from her. The amulet floated upwards, hanging above the lake like a miniature moon, and then one by one, like falling stars, lilies whiter than snow dropped from the sky onto the sparkling water. More and more, and then it drifted upwards, up into the sky, higher than the forest, higher than the furthest mountain peaks, higher than the moon itself, until it rested up in the heavens, the brightest of the glinting stars in a gathering blue dawn. Moll tried to cling on to what she was seeing, but she was falling, too fast now, tumbling down into bottomless black. Chapter 36. The Secrets of the Dawn. A low rolling sound grumbled in Moll's sleep. Gone were the drums, the rattles, and the chants. The noise was different, and she recognised it awake or asleep. Her eyes flickered open a fraction. 2 wide yellow-green orbs hovered in front of her face. They were lined with black circles and dashed with vertical stripes. She blinked. The rumbling noise again. Moll blinked a second time, then opened her eyes. Griff! She smiled, looked around her at the red velvet curtains drawn back from her bed, at the morning sunshine streaming through her shutters, at the polished pine walls, at the kingfisher feathers and a giant fir cone scattered on her wardrobe. Someone had restored it all, and for the first time in weeks Moll felt a surge of happiness. She buried her head in Griff's fur and laughed. He purred contently. We did it, Griff, she whispered. We found the first amulet and we set my pa's soul free. She tickled the wildcat's ears. And somewhere out there's my ma, she said. Her heart beat excitedly at the thought. Then she sat upright in her bed and gasped. Oh, and all that? Said Oak, who was sitting on a chair before a collection of strange objects strewn across on the edge of Moll's bed. Lucky charms from the camp, to make sure you woke up in good health. The stones with holes in them are from Hard Times Bob. He thinks they'll be lucky. He pointed to the largest stone, one that would have taken hours to haul inside the wagon. The daft old man thought he could squeeze his body through this one, but he got it stuck round his rib cage and he's had the hiccups ever since. Moll giggled. Oak picked up a jar full of minnows. Siddy's lucky charm, except no one in the camp agrees it is a lucky charm. He wanted to chuck it on your face to bring you round, but Paddy warned that was one step too far. Oak held up a cluster of red berries. Holly berries from Mushy. I'm afraid she hoped his fertility charm was the first thing you saw on coming round. You might start acting more like a lady in the future. Moll squeezed out the air from inside her cheek, and it made an unladylike squelch. And that, she asked, pointing to a black plaited bracelet which looked as if it might have been made from animal hair. That's from Alfie, Oak said. Said he didn't believe in lucky charms, so he made you a bracelet from Raven's tail. He said if Raven carried him away safe from the deep wood, maybe he could help bring you back too. Moll didn't need to ask what Oak had given her. Her wagon was as good as new, and it was clear he hadn't left her since the deep wood, and that kind of loyalty was more important than any present or charm. How long have I been sleeping? Moll asked. 4 days. The Dreamsnatcher, it almost sucked the life right out of you. I've never slept that good all along, she paused, her eyes widening. Does that mean it's stopped coming for me? The Dreamsnatch won't twist my dreams to nightmares any more. Oak smiled. You and Griff broke the Dreamsnatch. You shattered it to pieces once and for all when you lifted that amulet up. Moll leant into Griff. I don't understand, though. What happened back in Skull's clearing? Why did the amulet release all its power then? Why not when the Shadow Masks came to the camp? Oak's eyes sparkled. I'm not sure, but the old magic first stirred when time dawned, so magic's at its strongest when light changes, when daylight drops to dusk or night drifts to dawn. You're just saying words that begin with D. Oak shuffled to the bed and ruffled Moll's hair. I'm not lying, Moll. Magic's at its strongest when the light changes, so I think when dawn came to Skull's clearing, the amulet was at its most powerful. But didn't the Shadow Masks have curses and chants to break the amulet's power? There's nothing stronger than the powers locked inside the amulets of truth. Your pa said the first amulet stood for bravery, so when you raced to help Griff, you gave it even more power. The Shadow Masks may have brewed curses dark enough to splinter souls, but they were broken in the face of your courage. Oak smiled. The amulets are part of a deeper magic still, and, so long as we find them all, the Shadow Masks can't touch our souls. The last 4 shadow masks will come for me though, won't they? Moll said. They haven't gone for good. Oak shook his head. I don't think so. Not gone. Weakened, maybe. Forced back for a while. But they'll come again, he paused, which is why, in a few days, we'll be leaving the ancient wood. Moll shook her head. Leaving? But it's not safe, Moll. Darkbite knows where you and Griff are. But where will I go? This has always been home. Oak squeezed Moll's arm. We live as outlaws down by the sea. Moll's eyes grew big. By that big puddle of water leading out to the edge of the world? She shivered, then looked round a wagon. We'd have to leave all this, she paused. And what if Griff doesn't even like the sea? Oak smiled. I've been over the heath and down to a cove by the seashore, Moll, while you've been resting. He paused. And if you thought living in a wagon was good, wait until you see the cave I found. A ripple of excitement flickered inside Moll. She nodded to Griff. We might quite like caves, actually. You're the guardian of the oracle bones now, Moll. Soon you must throw the bones, and then we'll follow the bone reading to find the second amulet. With it, we'll destroy the soul splinter. Moll's body tingled. But Skull and Hemlock, they said their souls are locked inside the I can't say that. Soul splinter. And they're never going to die. How can we kill something that can't die? Oak shook his head. We just have to hope that if the first amulet destroys Skull and Hemlock like that, the last 2 will have the power to destroy the soul splinter. Then the Shadow Mask's soul will die, and the bones murmur, and all it stands for will be restored for good. Moll groaned. That's a heavy task. I was better with the jar of minnows, maybe even Mushy's hollyberries. Oak wrapped her up in a bear hug. Come and see everyone. They've missed you. Siddy said that even Porridge II's taken your absence hard. Once Oak had left, Moll bounced out of bed, filled with an energy she'd almost forgotten she'd ever had. She pushed Alfie's bracelet over her wrist, then threw on a dress, and then she remembered the clearing, the sacred oaks, the flames. She edged out of a wagon with Griff. Her mouth fell open. But Oak smiled. Turns out that amulet of yours had a healing power, same as the water in the well. Cinderella Bud said the sacred oaks twisted up stronger, bigger and greener than ever before when we were fighting Skull and Hemlock in the deep blood. We think it was your pa's way of saying thank you. Moll's gaze dropped to the centre of the clearing, where a haphazard jumble of spotted neckerchiefs, ruffled skirts, brightly coloured waistcoats, and glittering rings were assembled. Every member of Oak's camp was there, with Siddy and Alfie in the middle, waving an enormous banner, which only included one word spelt correctly. Welcome back, Molly. They'd drawn a picture of Moll and Griff next to the writing, but it was hard to tell which one was Griff and which one was Moll. Both were a mass of cross-looking squiggles with lots of fur and hair. Hard Times Bob had strung up his accordion, and in moments everyone was cheering and shouting, and even Cinderella Bull was shaking her shawl in an excited dance. Moll jumped off her wagon steps, and for a reason that was too difficult to explain, she shuffled over to Florence and hugged her tight. Florence smiled, and Moll knew that somewhere her pa would be watching. Mushy bustled over, sobbing loudly and embracing Moll with her favourite tea towel. Wisdom hoisted Moll up to her shoulders in a single leap. Griff sprang up to Moll's wagon's roof to watch while Siddy clambered onto Alfie's back, and they charged about the clearing, trying to wrestle Moll down. The cheering grew louder, the beats faster, and the dancing and wrestling wilder. Mind you don't make those wrestling towers any higher, Moll, Mushy shouted. The skies are full of strange birds, including great eagles that'll snatch you up and eat you whole. Before long, the entire camp was scoffing down doshi baki balls and toasting toasts of forest fruits tea in the summer sun. Moll sat with Siddy and Alfie while Griff nestled beneath one of the boxes they ate off, gulping down the food that Moll tossed to the ground for him. Moll turned to Alfie. So you're a member of Oak's camp now, and you'll learn our ways and superstitions soon enough. Like you must never wash a blanket in May because you'll be washing away your family, Siddy added excitedly. Alfie shrugged. Haven't got a family. Siddy tried again. If you're pregnant, you mustn't wear shoes because it's like putting your baby in a coffin before it's even born. Alfie raised his eyebrows. I'm not likely to have a baby either, Sid. Moll threw her hands up. We'll go through the superstitions another time, Siddy. What's more important than all is that this is a tribe. That's something you want to get into if you're in Oak's camp. Alfie took a swig of his tea. Who's in the tribe, then? Moll and Siddy drew themselves up very tall. Us two. We're the tribe. Moll paused, and I may ask Florence in a few days, if she promises not to make me go hawking with her. Oh, and Griff. He's in the tribe too. What does the tribe do? Alfie asked. Siddy lowered his voice. Breaks rules, mainly. Avoids chores. Tells lies on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Moll said. "And does brave things like rescuing trapped otters and mending owls' wings." Alfie considered. Moll leant forward so that only he could hear. "I'd do it, Alfie, because you've got to remember that I'm not buying into Skull's stories about your past.